So I'm Christie Lagally, and I beat the often path by challenging the way we make plant-based meat.
Welcome back to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer. On this show, we showcase unusual success stories to help us radically redefine what success means in our own lives and to help us understand that there are many, many, many dramatically different ways to achieve a life of fulfillment and meaning and, yes, financial success. My guest today is so cool. Christie Lagally's path towards starting a company should be deeply inspiring for anybody who cares about our planet. With a background in aerospace engineering, working at Boeing and other top-tier firms, she decided to put her brilliance and global perspective to work on tackling the problem of processed food and industrial food production. She used her expertise to create innovative new machinery that will make it fundamentally easier to scale plant-based chicken alternatives with her company, Rebellyous Foods. If you know me at all, you'll know how excited I am to hear and share her story today. She has truly beaten the often path. So here's the founder and CEO of Rebellyous Foods, Christie Lagally. I am very interested in the space, and there's it's a hot topic right now about the whole debate about, is it healthy? Or some people are saying, did you know that these meat alternatives are actually really bad for you? All kinds of gotchas, and there's a lot of animosity on the side of meat eaters. There's all kinds of stuff. But people like me, who have eaten a largely plant-based diet for many, many years now, appreciate these kinds of things and love these kinds of things. And that's why I had you on the show, because to me, having more variety so that I don't have to eat meat products is always a good thing. So can you tell everybody a little bit about your company and what it is that you have done?
Yeah, so Rebellyous Foods is a manufacturing technology company working to make plant-based meat available and affordable for everyone. And the way that we do that is we are designing and deploying new production equipment that we design literally ourselves and even build ourselves in order to fundamentally bring down the cost of making plant-based meat, to allow us to hit higher volumes for plant-based meat and achieve the ever sought after quality at scale issue of making plant-based meat. So, a lot of people say that the trick to getting everybody to convert as much as possible to plant-based products over eating animal products is price, taste, and convenience. And the way that we hit price, taste, and convenience is low cost manufacturing, quality manufacturing, and volume manufacturing. And that's the key to it. And that's what we're doing at Rebellyous Foods. So we're a producer of products, and we use our own technology to make plant-based meat faster, better, and cheaper.
Well, that's wonderful. Very good. And there's so many ways that we can jump into this. There's the mission part, there's the personal story part, both of which I want to talk about. But what do you have to say to those people? I know where I stand, those people who say, yeah, but these products, they're not actually healthy. Those people who say they're paleo diet kind of people. We should just be grilling meat like our cave men and women ancestors did. There's no place for this kind of technology. How would you address that at the outset here?
Well, I would say that the science says differently. There
science?
Are lots of
Wait, what's that word? I haven't heard of that word.
Differently.
I only know podcasts.
So there's a lot of different ways that we consume animal-based meat. Obviously, in the United States, we largely consume chicken as the number one meat. It's actually produced globally and that we consume globally on this planet. And then pork and beef are about even in terms of their consumption and production in the United States. Of those meats, we eat them in any form, from chicken nuggets to hamburgers to hot dogs to chicken pieces to fried pieces. There's such a wide variety of the ways that we make meat into other products to make them more palatable, to make them consumable, to make them even digestible. And hence, there's a lot of opportunity to replace meat in a variety of different ways. And a lot of different companies are working on different parts of that particular problem. And Rebellyous is no different. So when we look at the products that have been most problematic according to the World Health Organization. We know that red meat isn't good for us. We've known that for a really, really long time. We know that it is a carcinogen. We know that it is problematic for a number of other reasons. We also know that processed meat products are also a carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. And things like hot dogs and other like chicken nugget products are just, they're maybe a little bit less of a problem in terms of carcinogenic level, but it's a very, very serious charge against meat that these are not healthy products. But what we find is that people eat them anyway.
Right.
And
it tastes good.
Because they taste good and they're convenient and they're easy to feed our kids. Exactly. And so what often is confusing the conversation around plant-based meat is this idea that all processed foods are the same. And that is just not the case. Bread is as processed as plant-based meat is, if not more so, and yet it is not considered a class 1 carcinogen. Right. And yogurt is heavily processed, but it is not often considered a processed food. Trust me, it does not come out of the cow tasting like strawberries. And so there's a lot of food processing that is lumped into one particular concern about, we should eat less processed foods. But health professionals are trying to tell us, yes, please eat whole fruits and vegetables so that you can have a healthier diet. Eat your leafy green vegetables, eat your beans and rice and things like that are all whole foods vegetables. But when it comes to meat, the answers are a little less clear, especially because we don't eat whole cows. We don't eat whole chickens. We eat processed portions of those particular animals, and those are inherently processed food, whether it's made out of chickens or cows or turkeys or whatever. And we heavily process them in some case. We inject them with salt and flavoring. We turn them into chicken nuggets. We turn them into hot dogs. Since people are going to eat those products anyway, and because it's very, very hard to get away from processed products, especially in a fast-paced environment, especially in your school lunch program when the kids just won't eat anything but chicken nuggets, especially when it's a stressful week of tests and standardized tests or something like that. We have found that we need these processed products, and the goal of the plant-based meat industry is to make them considerably less harmful. As a result, plant-based meat products that are in similar form as hot dogs and hamburgers and chicken nuggets and things like that have so many of the harms removed. First of all, they are not carcinogens. They are simply plants that are mixed together in exactly the same way that bread is mixed together, which is also a processed product. They are also lower in saturated fat than animal-based meat, sometimes lower in sodium, not always. And then they have no cholesterol. In the case of chicken products, no antibiotics, which a lot of schools are trying to get away from. And as a result, the micronutrient profile for plant-based products is an order of magnitude better than the meat products that we are working to replace. And that is fundamentally the harm reduction that plant-based meat can offer, not just to our health, but then there's the wider issue of the planet. Better for the planet, considerably less CO2 emissions as a result, and better for the animals, even better for pandemic prevention, since, chicken is the next, biggest threat to humans when it comes to another global pandemic.
Well, those are all fabulous points. And it brings to mind, I believe it was in the book Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman, where he talked about the inventor of Lunchables. Didn't he do a complete 180? Like, he created this ultra processed thing, and then later in life, he realized that it was a huge mistake, basically that he'd invented the next cigarettes when it came out that these things were carcinogens. I could be completely off base on this, but I'm pretty sure there's a story like that floating around. That at the time, we just didn't know that that was the case. It was a matter of convenience. We said, okay, we can process these things in this way. And then the science came out that said, hey, that's super harmful.
Well, I'm a big fan of Rodney. It's Rodney, right? Was that his name? I'm trying to remember his name, because he later became the founder of Improved Nature.
So he did do a complete 180. I'm correct?
Oh, yeah.
That? Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I thought
I'd
I don't know where I pulled that from. Sometimes things just show up in my brain and I don't know where they come from or if they're accurate, but I'm glad to know that Rodney is a real person who did that.
Yeah. So the inventor of Lunchables, whose name that I would love to look up this moment, but I'm,
All right. I'll
but
help
maybe
you
we
out.
can.
Continue your story.
Okay, he's the founder of Renewed Improved Nature, and he has a wonderful story. He's actually an inspiration to me as somebody who also wanted to work on harm reduction. But he not only was one of the inventors of Lunchable, but before that was working on USAID programs for food drops in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and other places where the country's not, the specific country isn't important because I'm probably not getting the details of his story right. But the idea is that early in the 1950s, when plant-based meat started to be seen as a really interesting way to feed people at lower cost and get them safer levels of protein, this was a highly sought after effort by the US government to try to create protein from plants and stable proteins from plants. So Rodney and others, food scientists like himself, were trying to figure out ways to stabilize meat so it didn't degrade because it is dead animals.
Sure.
And so the solution they found was creating plant-based proteins or meat analogs or soy analogs to support global feeding programs where food stabilization or shelf-stable food was absolutely necessary in order to get food drops to people who were in refugee situations high on a mountain. So, like I said, he's actually a huge inspiration to me in starting Rebellyous Foods because he understood when he started Improved Nature that those types of products could be valuable to obviously other people. And Improved Nature is one of our fellow plant-based meat companies. They also work in the National School Lunch Program. They make great products, and they, put them in a wide variety of other products, like packaged products and other food products. And I've always been really impressed by that. But I wouldn't say that he necessarily, he can speak for himself in terms of that particular story. But I wouldn't say that he necessarily saw the light at the end of the tunnel or something like that, the better way. But it's one and the same problem. People who are trying to make meat healthier often find that plant-based meat ends up being the better solution because at a chemistry level, at a protein level, people can get plant proteins just more effectively and safer than they can get protein from animal sources.
You personally came from a very unusual background for somebody who is involved in food. So what was the path that you were on before you took up this particular challenge?
Yeah. So before I came into the food industry and started a company in plant-based meat, I was working in the aerospace industry. I was an aerospace engineer, first at ATK Space Systems. Then I worked for a variety of consulting companies on ground-based and space-based telescopes. And then I went on to work for Boeing commercial airplanes, of which I had a fantastic time doing. I really love aerospace, the exploration of our universe, and on a variety of aerospace projects. They've always been really interesting. But as many people often do, we are complex people and I'm more than one passion. And another passion of mine has been animal welfare and human welfare and women's rights and, really supporting a better world overall, climate change. And as an advocate, I was kind of wearing myself into the ground, doing kind of two jobs, being an advocate and a speaker, someone who speaks out on issues. And then, of course, doing my 40-hour plus a week job at Boeing commercial airplanes. But one of the things I was so passionate about is addressing large-scale animal agriculture. It's one of those things that kind of combines so many social justice issues all into one. So obviously, it's better for the animals. It's better for our health, for people who have family members who are suffering from chronic diseases that are often preventable, or they can even mitigate the impacts of them. You really want our family members to be able to live longer and not suffer heart attacks or strokes, or if those things happen, they're at least delayed as long as possible. And so I really was passionate about, what do we do about all of these social justice issues? And it really comes down to industrialized meat production and large scale meat consumption. And so I saw the opportunity to go into working on the replacements for that. I was inspired by some of the other organizations that I volunteered with the Humane Society of the United States, which helped me understand programs like Meatless Monday and meat reduction programs, and ultimately was inspired by other founders in this industry and really wanted to understand how we could make more and better plant-based meat and make it cost effective so that everybody could afford it. And that's when the idea for Seattle Food Tech, which is our corporate name, and Rebellyous Foods, which is our brand name, came about, because that's now fundamentally what we're doing. We are designing new production equipment to make plant-based meat faster, better, and cheaper, and then launching that equipment to bring down the cost of making these products so that Rebellyous products can be available and affordable for everyone.
Bang! It's that point where we interrupt for a little bit of a quick commercial. And the commercial this time is just a quick chance for me to remind you that if you like this show, please remember to subscribe to it on your podcast platform of choice. Subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you really like the show or her story or any of these guests, please rate the show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, leave a nice review. Share this episode with somebody who is interested in plant-based food. Share it with somebody who's interested in CEO or founder stories. Help me grow this podcast with you. That's all I ask. So now back to the show. So next comes the question of, for your personal journey, you make this realization, you make this connection, and you say, you know what, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to streamline my own existence. I'm going to build the change that I want to build in this world. From the moment that you conceived that idea to actually founding this company, can you describe to us some of the steps that you took to make that dream a reality?
Yeah, well, like a lot of people, I was not rich enough to just start a company. I was also very confused about how so many entrepreneurs who I saw as being able to dive into this space were doing so after having made plenty of money in maybe other parts of their lives. And so they could even dive in and be an entrepreneur and be a founder without even paying themselves to all the more save on money. I think one of the biggest steps forward I had to take was face the fact that as a person with no level of wealth, I had to find a way to both fund the company and fund it sufficiently so that I could, keep a roof over my head and, feed my dogs. And that in and of itself was probably one of the biggest jumps I had to make. At the end of the day, there are so many people and so many investors who feel like, you should be diving into this with either an altruistic, an altruistic view and be able to just sacrifice everything for the company. There's no doubt that happens in the end, but I really do feel like one of the big misnomers is that you have to be rich to start a company. And the way we ended up doing it is with Seattle Food Tech and Rebellyous Food was to fundamentally create a structure, a plan around what we wanted to do, which is develop new production equipment based on my past, 15 to 20 years of experience, developing new equipment for Boeing commercial airplanes, flight equipment for ATK space systems, doing consulting with ground-based telescopes and design work. So all of that could come forward as I had at least the credibility to say, I think if we develop the right equipment for making plant-based meat, we could fundamentally open up a very, very different market for this business that is fundable by investors. And ultimately it was. So the fundability of a company obviously comes from a great idea, the ability to execute that idea, the ability to show that it will be profitable at some point in the near future. And that's what we were able to bring forward to our investors over the last 4 years, which is to, show that we can actually bring to light technology to make plant-based meat faster, better, and cheaper. And so that was really the step. It was getting over that first hurdle of, do I have to be rich? Do I have to live on ramen noodles? And well, to be frank, I actually did do that for a while. But at the same time, eventually I was able to, take a salary, pay for everybody else's salary. And now we're a company of 50 people strong. And, we're taking care of everybody. Let's put it that way.
So when it came time to realize that you did need funding, how did you start that process? Because I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. I'm assuming you didn't know much about that space going into that.
So I actually did know somewhat
Okay.
about that space. I actually left Boeing commercial airplanes 1 year before I started Rebellious Foods, and went to work briefly for the Good Food Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank working on alternative proteins. I helped them launch that nonprofit with kind of the early foundational documents and technology strategy around both plant-based meat and clean meat. I wouldn't say it was the direct line to coming up with the idea for Rebellious Foods, but it definitely broke open a lot of the problems with the plant-based meat industry. So, for example, in the United States alone, we produce over 108 billion pounds of animal-based meat, and yet we only produce about 0.5% of that volume in the plant-based meat space, meaning that plant-based meat is largely unavailable for the vast majority of Americans, and it costs 2 to 5 times the cost. So, plant-based meat as a solution to something like global climate change or large-scale meat reduction or human health issues or even pandemic prevention isn't helped by the fact that we don't make enough of it and it costs too much. So fundamentally, when I decided to start a company, I had some background and some connections in the plant-based space. I had also had those connections from being a volunteer, both at the Good Food Institute prior to that, as well as the Humane Society of the United States and other social justice advocacy groups that were working to change the space for the better through advocacy, but also encouraging people like me to try and jump out and make the change we want to see in the world through company building.
Something that's very frustrating to me as somebody who likes these kinds of things is you'll see something that appears to be a good protein patty, a good meat replacement. Even Trader Joe's has a nice one, high protein. And I've never understood this. They'll give you 2 wrapped in individually wrapped plastic in an individual box. Now, why can't I get 45 of these things without the plastic? Why do I need to go through all of this single-use plastic? And it's just shocking how we got one piece right, but then there's this other piece that we are still so far behind on. And that's always kind of confused me. Also, just walking through Whole Foods in general, I think to myself, how many dollars are being spent on the packaging of these quote unquote health food things? They're thicker cardboard, more ink, more print, all of this stuff. And I'm like, guys, aren't we kind of missing another point here that it's all tied into the same ecosystem? How do you feel about stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic to discuss how we address packaging in the food industry, but it's also really helpful to understand why. So when I heard your story there, I thought of 2 things. First of all, why are we packaging plant-based meat in 2 patties when most of us don't have 2 people at home? I mean, we often have 5 people, or
Exactly.
even if you have 2 people, maybe
or I'm hungry.
You want to eat more than one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's address that first, and then the second is, what do we do about packaging in the food industry, but why are we even here? So let's start with the first one because it's relevant to plant-based meat specifically. Most plant-based meat does come in small packages for one very, very good reason. It costs a lot to make these products, and the only way to make them palatable from a price perspective for consumers is to package them into small packages. And that's really unfortunately, that's why you see Beyond Burger with 2 patties for $7.99.
Exactly.
It's why you see, Beyond, Impossible Burgers for $12 for 4 patties or something when the competitor is at 3. So it's really, really different. Why it costs so much to make plant-based meat is exactly the problem that Rebellious Foods is tackling. The vast majority of plant-based meat in this industry is made via what's called mix and form production, which is exactly the same way we make bread. We bring together disparate ingredients, we process them in just the right way, and then we get a really formed dough, and then we take that dough and form it into nuggets or chicken tenders or patties or whatever. That mixing process and most of the processes done to make plant-based meat is all being done in a batch process using conventional meat processing equipment, which was never designed to make plant-based meat. So this entire industry is built on the back of industrial equipment that is ill-designed for the production of the product that we're purporting to make. And as a result, that is what's fundamentally costing us too much money to make these products. Now, the ingredients also cost more too, but part of the reason the ingredients cost more is because it's an order of magnitude smaller industry than the meat industry. So what we're doing at Rebellyous,
is that also subsidies for the meat industry?
Subsidies make a difference. Yes, subsidies make a difference, but they're not quite to the scale of like chicken. So we produce over 45 billion pounds of chicken in the United States. The vast majority is funded by people who are buying it and eating it. So subsidies matter, especially in certain sectors like the National School Lunch Program, where it is hard to compete. But the vast majority of chicken is being paid for by people who are eating it. But what we did at Rebellyous Foods is we just threw out the old equipment and designed our new equipment so that our products could be made at dramatically lower cost. And as a result, the right equipment allows us to bring a 60% reduction in the cost of making plant-based meat. That is fundamentally going to translate into more burgers in the package, into making it palatable for that $12 package of burgers to include 10 patties instead of 2 or for 4, whatever we said earlier. So that's fundamentally a plant-based meat industry problem. And it's one we're working on day in and day out at Rebellyous Foods.
Bravo.
Thank you. The other concern, which I personally feel incredibly passionate about as well, is packaging and plastic in the food industry in general. So one way we can address that, of course, is to put more products in package, buy in bulk, essentially utilize that plastic better, since if we have more product in there, then we're using less plastic overall. So that's a huge thing. And that's something, scale in the plant-based meat industry can address to some degree. But we have to go back to why we package so much product, especially in the United States, but of course, globally, all of packaging is done this way for food. And it's really around food safety. It is really, really hard in a global environment to provide safe food to people without packaging it. And there are some really, really innovative companies who have come up with better ways to do this, especially for like fresh fruits and vegetables. I encourage people to check out Apeel, A-P-E-E-L. They're a really great company that does kind of a wax coating on various different products. And that's a better way of providing fresh fruits and vegetables without the packaging. So more and more that we can do this is solve the problem of food safety with respect to plastic. If you think about it, if we did not have plastic, which I'm not advocating we have more of, but absolutely less of, it would be a very, very serious food safety issue.
Okay, so this is just one of the great challenges that you have to work on.
Yes,
trying to figure
definitely.
out how to balance food safety with something that I'm sure you also believe is incredibly harmful.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the dangers around food safety are real. I mean, the reason that we have white bread is not because people were just dying for bread to be as white as possible. The reason we have white bread is because it was developed at a time when food safety was not a priority. And they found that they could show people their bread was pure by making it as white as possible and that they weren't hiding anything in it. So there was a lot of like response to previous food safety concerns of the 1920s to the 1940s, which is where a lot of processed foods come from.
Do you feel that the tide is turning slowly?
For plant-based meat and
in general,
industrial animal agriculture? I do. I think there are some really important questions to ask in the plant-based meat industry today. So a lot of people at the end of 2020 were very concerned about the fact that Beyond Meat missed their sales targets for 2021, or, at least for a certain quarter in 2021. But it was still a huge accomplishment what Beyond Meat did. And then more and more analysts were coming around saying, oh, well, this is a shift in the industry, but I don't think it's going to surpass more than 2% of the animal-based meat industry. Meanwhile, a lot of people don't realize this. By volume, the meat industry adds an entire plant-based meat industry every year. It's growing by 3% every year. So we're actually growing the meat industry by volume much faster than we are growing the plant-based meat industry. So this is really important for understanding that, the plant-based meat industry has seen some ups and downs, and analysts are starting to wonder, like, what is this future going to be? But right now, the big question is no longer, do people love plant-based meat? Because most people who've tried it, the recent products, the better products, the Impossibles, the Beyond, the Rebellious, they know that plant-based meat can be fantastic. It replaces animal-based meat very effectively. We have to hit the price points. And that's what we're doing at Rebellyous Foods more than anything else, is making sure that that high quality product is going to be available to feed your family of 5, to feed the 10 kids that came over for a sleepover for somebody's birthday, and they all got chicken nuggets that night, and they were all plant-based.
Nobody knew the difference.
And nobody knew the difference. Yeah.
They all survived, if you can believe that.
Exactly. And now we have like 20 school districts that are serving our products, and kids don't know the difference.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's so
exactly.
Incredible.
It is.
It smells good. It tastes good. Kids are happy. If they're getting the nutrients they need, they're fine.
They've got the protein they need without the saturated fat levels, without cholesterol, and no antibiotics.
I love all of that.
No artificial colors or flavors, too.
Right. It seems like rocket science, but apparently it's not quite rocket science. It's just aerospace engineering, folks.
Fair enough.
Almost there. So as we start coming to a close here, one of the key themes of this is the unusual paths towards success. I'm curious, in the last 4 years of doing this, what are some genuinely unusual or unexpected insights that you've had?
Well, one of the best options or opportunities when you start a company is the option, the opportunity to make all sorts of different decisions that have been made in the status quo. So, for example, hiring the right team members has often been seen as something that is kind of done one way in the industry. And then if you want to add diversity and inclusion to those particular to that particular issue, you somehow have to change or somehow have to force the issue. Like we must have, certain candidates of diverse racial backgrounds or gender backgrounds. And somehow that feels like a forced option. At Rebellyous, I feel like we have learned and are continue to learn that, once we provide a place where people feel really comfortable working, that is what fundamentally opens up the benefits of a diverse workforce. Now, we still have a long way to go at Rebellyous. We want to be even more inclusive and more diverse and have more people with more ideas about how and why and to do things. But I really feel like when you build a company, you can kind of go with kind of the easiest thing that happens. There's so many people who come to our doorstep and say, I have 15 years of food production experience and I can just break this thing wide open. Or, and that's great, but they're going to do things exactly the way they did things before. The opportunity to find people who can think outside the box and who are passionate about things, even when they get hard, and are willing to do things differently, even when it might be harder at first, goes hand in hand with diversity. It goes hand in hand with finding people of all backgrounds who have different ways of doing things, who come from different family situations. And even in our company, we're largely woman operated. And we are really, really proud of that, because that makes us a stronger company to make change. It doesn't mean we're going to look like another plant-based meat company or even look like another food company. But it does mean that at the end of our road, whenever that is, maybe 10, 20, 50 years from now, we are fundamentally going to change an intractable system rather than just create another plant-based meat company and more products at high price and low volume. So we're fundamentally going to change the structure of making plant-based meat. And I believe that comes from the diversity and strength of our workforce that is, in a lot of ways could be considered non-traditional.
Well, I can honestly think of no better way to wrap this episode up than everything you just said. I think that's a phenomenal answer and way to put a bow on this. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and to share your remarkable story. I think there are so many incredible pieces in here for anybody who's paying attention. And I very, very, very much look forward on a personal level to seeing your rise and success and to seeing you take over more schools and increasing awareness. And I have an extreme vested personal interest with my family in your success. So
Thank you.
I look forward to you becoming all of the things that you set out to become. So again, thank you very, very much for joining me. And with that, the official podcast is over.